because we're taking a deep dive into something you might not expect, like the world of people who teach theology.
Okay.
You sent this fascinating podcast over about it, and I got to be honest, it really piqued my interest. So is this something you've actually thought about doing, or are you just like generally fascinated by the whole idea of, teaching something you love?
Well, it's interesting you should say passion because that's actually like a really important takeaway here. You see, like, there's this real thirst for theological knowledge out there these days, and it's not just about, Sunday school anymore. People want, like, deeper meaning, historical context, maybe even, like, some philosophical debate thrown in.
Right.
This, I guess you could say the surge in interest is kind of reflected in the qualifications that aspiring teachers need now.
You're talking about that whole master's degree thing. Because honestly, I was surprised to hear that it's almost like a requirement now, even for smaller teaching roles. I always figured, a couple semesters of seminary would be enough.
Yeah.
Apparently not.
It makes sense, though, when you think about the bigger picture.
Okay.
Theology is becoming increasingly, like, sophisticated, blending history, philosophy, ethics, you name it.
Wow.
And people, they want teachers who can really guide them through, like, all these complex ideas. It's definitely not just about, reciting scripture anymore.
Yeah, no kidding. And speaking of going beyond the textbook, the podcast really emphasized the importance of real-world experience.
Absolutely.
Not just, academics, but like actual hands-on involvement before you even step foot in the classroom.
And not just like any experience either. They really emphasize things like leading Bible study groups, facilitating church groups, even working with like youth groups.
Really?
Yeah. It turns out all of those experiences actually provide surprisingly transferable skills,
Okay, I got to ask, how does like wrangling a group of teenagers prepare you to teach theology?
Well, think about it. You're public speaking, you're engaging an audience. Sometimes you're even like managing different personalities and opinions.
Right.
Those are valuable, like really valuable skills in any teaching environment, not just a theological one. Listening to this podcast really made me realize how much those real world experiences hone skills that are, sought after in a lot of different fields,
So it's not just about knowing your stuff, it's about knowing how to share it, right?
Exactly. And that actually brings us to like another super interesting point that the podcast made. The idea of the theology teacher as a living example.
Now that's something I can get behind.
Right. Like think back to the teachers who had the biggest impact on your life. I bet it wasn't just their knowledge that stuck with you. It was their passion, their character, the way they, embodied their teachings.
That's so true. It's like they say, actions speak louder than words.
Right.
And in this case, the actions of a theology teacher carry even more weight because they're seen as like guides, as mentors.
Exactly. And that emphasis on mentorship actually ties into the next important point they made, the importance of networking.
Oh, yeah. Networking big time.
And not just for career advancement, but for like personal growth within the field too. They really stressed finding those like more experienced teachers who can offer guidance, open doors for you, and maybe even help you avoid some common pitfalls that people fall into.
That reminds me of how important networking is in my line of work, too. Building those connections can really make all the difference, no matter what you do. But I imagine it's even more crucial in a field like theology, where open dialogue and diverse perspectives are so important, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, they actually talked about the challenges of navigating differing opinions, which can get really complex, especially in, theological discussions. We can definitely circle back to that later, but it just goes to show how important those mentor figures can be in helping you, navigate those tricky situations.
And it's not just about, like, navigating those different opinions just within theological circles, right?
Right.
The podcast also talked about how tricky it can be to address those differing viewpoints when you're actually teaching.
Yeah.
I imagine that takes like a certain kind of, finesse.
Oh, for sure. It's one thing to like wrestle with these complex theological issues on your own.
Right.
But it's totally different when you're trying to guide a whole classroom of people, all with their own unique perspectives through these debates.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And honestly, the podcast hosts didn't shy away from that challenge at all. They actually went into depth about, fostering a respectful dialogue, especially when things get a little, heated, which, let's be real, is bound to happen when you're dealing with beliefs people care so deeply about.
Absolutely. And that's a skill set that goes way beyond just theological classrooms, don't you think?
Totally.
I mean, who couldn't use some help navigating tough conversations these days? Whether it's at work, in our personal lives, even just scrolling through social media, it seems like everyone's got a strong opinion about something.
Yeah, that's the world we live in now. But what's so interesting here is that the principles they were talking about, like active listening, empathy, trying to really understand where the other person is coming from instead of just trying to win an argument, those are things we can all use in our lives, no matter what we believe or where we come from.
That's a good point.
It's like they were, without even meaning to, slipping in these life lessons while they were talking about teaching theology.
Exactly. It's like they're saying, even if you never see yourself teaching theology, this stuff still matters for your everyday life.
Exactly. And that kind of brings us to another really interesting part of theological education today. The rise of online platforms. Like, the podcast spent a good chunk of time digging into what it means to teach theology in the digital world.
You know, it's funny. When I was first thinking about this whole deep dive, I pictured these like dusty libraries and old school classrooms.
Yeah.
But the more we talk about it, the more I realize just how much this field is changing.
Right.
Embracing technology, reaching more people than ever before.
It's a total paradigm shift. And like any major shift, it's got its own unique set of, opportunities and challenges that come with it.
Yeah, I bet. So what are some of the hurdles you face when you take those theological conversations online?
Well, for one thing, you're talking about a whole new level of accessibility, right? Think about the possibilities. You've got people from all walks of life, literally all over the planet, who can suddenly engage with these theological ideas and connect with others who share their interests. It's actually pretty exciting.
Yeah, it really is. It's like you're breaking down walls and building bridges all through the power of the internet. It's kind of amazing when you really think about it.
It really is. But, it's not without its difficulties. Like, for one, you lose that face-to-face element, which can make it tougher to really build relationships and a sense of community.
That's true.
You also have to be really aware of how different people learn best in an online environment. Like, it's not enough to just lecture at a screen. You gotta be engaging, tech-savvy, and come up with creative ways to get people talking and interacting, even if they're in totally different time zones.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like you need this whole other set of skills, almost like you have to become a producer and a tech wizard on top of being a theological scholar.
Exactly. And then there are the purely technical things too.
Oh, right. Of course.
You're dealing with different platforms, learning management systems, trying to make sure it's accessible for everyone. It's a whole other world, and it takes a real willingness to adapt and experiment to make it work.
It sounds pretty intimidating.
Yeah.
But also exciting at the same time.
Yeah.
But I am curious, with all these new challenges and everything, has the core purpose of teaching theology actually changed at all? After this whole conversation, I got to say, my perspective on what it even means to teach theology has really changed.
Yeah.
Going in, I thought it would be all about, doctrine and dogma.
Right.
But it seems like it's just as much about, people skills and being able to adapt and connect with people in new ways,
It really is fascinating. This deep dive has really shown just how connected teaching and learning are to how the world is changing around us,
Yeah.
At the heart of it all, teaching theology is still about guiding people to understand their faith and where it fits into the bigger picture of everything.
Right.
But the actual methods, the tools, even what we even think of as a classroom, those are all rapidly changing.
It makes you wonder, though, if we strip away all the technology and new teaching methods and all of that, what's that one key thing that makes a theology teacher, truly great? What's that secret sauce?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And I actually think it goes back to something we were talking about before, being a living example.
Oh, right, yeah.
No matter how technologically advanced the world gets, people are always going to be drawn to authenticity, to those people who, really live out the values they talk about.
It's that walk the walk thing, right?
Ministry.
It's not enough to just talk the talk, especially when you're dealing with something as personal and meaningful as faith is.
Exactly. And that's a really good reminder for all of us, I think, whether we want to teach theology or not.
Yeah, that's true.
If teaching, even in the most casual way, is about having an impact on others, helping them see the world differently, then it makes you really stop and think. What are we teaching the people around us just by the way we live our lives, by the things we say and do? I think that's something worth thinking about.
Absolutely. It's like that ripple effect,
Yeah.
You never know how far your influence might go or whose life you might touch. This deep dive has given me a lot to think about, and I have a feeling I'm going to be chewing on these ideas for a while. Thanks for, going on this journey with me.
Anytime. It's been fun.